The Mind Bend deals with themes and subject matters that may not be suitable for all listeners. If you or someone you know is in need, please contact Lifeline on 131114 or seek crisis support in your local area. Welcome to The Mind Bend, where we discuss everything from conspiracy.
They were riding in an open automobile when the shots were fired. The president, his limp body carried in the arms of his wife Jacqueline, has rushed to Parkland Hospital.
History.
It's now universally agreed that the cataclysm was caused by a 6-mile wide chunk of rock.
Murder.
Chris Watts handcuffed and head down in court on Tuesday as he was charged with the premeditated murders of his pregnant wife.
And all things strange. Let's dive on in. What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Mind Bend podcast. Alright, before we kick this one off, I just want to remind everyone to get amongst it on our socials at the Mind Bend podcast, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Even ask me a question on Anchor or send me an email, themindbendpodcast@gmail.com. Alright, today we are going to be talking about the life and the death of John Wheeler. As a quick introduction, Wheeler was a Vietnam veteran, the chairman of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund, a businessman, a father, a husband, and a former White House aide who unfortunately died due to some very suspicious circumstances in late December 2010. We're going to take a look at John, or Jack as he's also known, just in case I mention the name Jack and you're wondering who in the world is Jack. We're going to take a look at his early life, his career, and the timeline leading up to his death. But first, just a quick word from our sponsor, and then we'll get right into it. So, who was John Wheeler? Well, John was born on December the 14th, 1944 in Texas. His father, Joseph, was a military man, and Janet, his mother, was a stay-at-home housewife. John had 2 siblings, both of which were younger than him. Wheeler graduated from West Point Military Academy in 1966, and he then went on to serve as a staff officer in Vietnam before leaving active duty in 1971. From here, he would go on to many career changes, however, still involved in government and military industries, such as consultant to acting Under Secretary of Defense for Acquisition, Special Assistant to the Secretary of the Air Force, Special Assistant to the Acting Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Installations, Logistics and Energy, and had several roles involving security and counseling committees. He then had many military startups and charities, and the last company he was currently working for at the time of his death was called MitaCorp, who was a defense contracting firm. Other notable roles for Jack include his time in law, and that from 1979 through to 1989 he was the chairman of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. He was also an aide to the White House during and after the Bush era of administration. As you can imagine, those who knew Jack and anyone involved in the political world at the time were shocked to hear the news that on the 31st of December 2010, Jack's body was discovered at Cherry Island landfill in Wilmington, Delaware, after a garbage truck had dumped its payload. One would assume that with all his friends in Washington, and with the full force of the US government, and with the sophisticated technology and investigation capabilities of the 2010 era, that his murder would have been solved in a matter of months. And yet, despite the high-profile crime and the veritable bounty of resources at the disposal of the myriad of investigative agencies, this mystery still today has gone unsolved for more than 10 years. Now, if you haven't already, please feel free to go and have a look at the reboot of an old school TV show called Unsolved Mysteries, which is now on Netflix, which is one of the many sources used for this podcast episode you're about to hear. If you'd like to go do so, I suggest you stop the podcast now and go watch that. Otherwise, this is going to spoil the case for you. Alright, for those of you that are still with us, let's dive in and have a look at the timeline surrounding Jack's death. December the 28th. Jack, who's been spending the holidays with his family in New York, returns to work in Washington, D.C. during the day. Before phone records show him returning to his home in Newcastle City, his wife was currently in New York and Jack was home alone. Phone records show him returning to Newcastle City at approximately 5:30 p.m. At 11:30 that night, a house under construction across the street from Jack becomes the subject of a police investigation when smoke bombs are set off inside. Jack's phone is then found at the scene in the grass. It's unclear whether or not the phone was found that night or the next day, as I can't find any information on that. Jack no longer has his phone at this point, and police are unable to accurately track his movements after this point. However, December the 29th, Jack's wife attempts to call him, but she's unable to reach him. Now, anyone that knows Jack knows that this is highly unusual, as his phone is always on him and he always is prompt to answer the phone or at the very least make a return call. At 9:30 a.m, Jack sends an email to MITRE advising them that his house has been broken into and that his cell phone, wallet, key fob for the building, briefcase and MITRE ID card have been stolen. He doesn't contact the police to report this burglary, which again, that could seem suspicious, but the industry that he was in, it may not. He does not attempt to contact his wife via email and notify her of this break-in or that his phone was stolen. At 6 p.m. that night, Jack visits a local pharmacy not far from his house, and this is caught on CCTV footage. Jack gets his prescription filled at this pharmacy often, and the staff know him quite well. However, on this occasion, he enters the pharmacy looking for a ride to Wilmington. Several people in the pharmacy overhear his conversation with the staff and offer him a ride to Wilmington. Investigators believe that Jack wanted to get to Wilmington in order to retrieve his car, which was left parked at the Amtrak station when heading to New York with his wife for the holidays. Now, I just want to point out that one of the key notes in this whole case is the fact that Jack was currently medicating himself for bipolar disorder. And that is really going to play a key factor in all of this. If you know any history on this disease, it can cause people to have some really manic highs and some incredibly bad lows. At 6:42 p.m, Jack shows up in a parking garage in Wilmington. He's looking for his vehicle, but unbeknownst to him, he's not even in the correct parking garage. His car is parked blocks away from him in a separate garage. However, Jack's family have come out and are quite adamant that he's always had a very bad time with his sense of direction and that he'd often lose or forget where he'd parked his car and catch a cab home. It was basically because this man had that much going on, he didn't want to lose any concentration on the thought of where did I park my car. Jack is seen on camera in the parking garage having a discussion with the garage attendant in an attempt to locate his vehicle. In contrast to his appearance at the pharmacy CCTV, Jack appears somewhat disbeveled, distressed and agitated, and for some reason is carrying one shoe in his hand. He also appears to be very paranoid, checking behind him and around corners as though he's being watched or hunted. He tells the garage attendant that his briefcase has been stolen and his parking slip was inside it. When the attendant asks how it was stolen, he repeatedly responds only that it was stolen and never mentions how. December the 30th. At 3:26 p.m, Jack is picked up on camera in the basement of the Nemours building, which is an office complex in downtown Wilmington. His whereabouts is approximately 20 hours since last being seen on TV footage. Jack's whereabouts in the approximate 20 hours since last being caught on camera in the garage the night before are unknown. It is stated that investigators later found evidence that Jack spent the night of the 29th and part of the day of the 30th in the basement. Now, the Nemours basement is a large complex that includes a fitness centre, a maze of hallways and employee locker rooms. Jack is not known to have any connection with this building or the people that work in it, aside from a single appointment there many years earlier. Jack seems less shaken at this point than the night before, but his behaviour is still incredibly erratic. I believe personally that he's trying to lay low or hide from whoever was hunting him. Although I don't have any evidence to support this, and this is basically my speculation just based on his appearance in the footage. Now at 8:39, Jack's seen on camera leaving the Nemours building, now wearing a black hooded sweatshirt as opposed to the business clothes he was wearing the night before. At no point up until now has Jack been seen in the possession of a second set of clothes before this time, and it's quite possible that he took these from the basement employee lockers. At 8:41, Jack appears on camera in the valet section of the Hotel DuPont, walking with a hood over his head past the hotel before continuing down the street, and this is the last known footage of Jack whilst he was alive. It was later determined that at approximately 11 p.m, a possible witness believes that he may have seen Jack share a cab with a stranger when he overheard the cab and its unknown passenger were going to Newark, Delaware. To my knowledge, this second cab passenger nor the cab driver have ever been identified, and I can also find no information on the witness who believes he saw this interaction. This witness statement has never been corroborated, and this may not be accurate. This leads us to December the 31st. Jack's body is found at approximately 9:56 a.m. at the Cherry Island landfill in Wilmington, Delaware. 6 miles away, Jack's neighbour in Newcastle City, Robert Dill, observes an open window at Jack's house and upon closer inspection believes that something is wrong. Dill is the property's caretaker whenever Jack is out of town. He then feels comfortable to enter the house to make sure that Jack is alright. Upon entry, he observes what he believes to be the scene of a burglary. Dill observes tipped over plants, kitchen appliances out of place, spice bottles strewn across the counter and floor, and broken dishes piled in the sink. Dill also observed what is later determined to be comet powder all over the floor, with a single barefoot footprint visible in the powder. Laying on the floor, covered in powder, are Jack's ceremonial West Point sword and shield, a copy of the book A Long Grey Line, in which Wheeler was featured during his West Point days. This is found on the table. Dill then calls police to report the burglary. Back in Wilmington, detectives are able to identify Jack's body and contact Newcastle City Police Department, where Jack's house is located. Upon contacting the NCCPD, Wilmington detectives are informed that NCCPD officers are currently already en route to Jack's residence to respond to Dill's reported burglary claim. Law enforcement at the landfill are later able to determine that the trash Jack's body was found in came from Newark. Newark is approximately 14 miles from Jack's last known location on camera in Wilmington. Subsequently, after zeroing in on several dumpsters, they found the trash truck that dumped the trash in the landfill. They were able to locate Jack's DNA on a dumpster along that route. This led investigators to conclude that Jack's body had been placed inside the dumpster sometime after leaving the Hotel DuPont the night before. Jack had no known connection to Newark, Delaware. Now, I just want to bring up some important notes on what we've discussed so far. Jack's family, including his wife, knew that he wasn't suited well to civilian everyday life. He always had to be on the go and having his mind on the task. I just want to discuss as well his bipolar disorder. Now, the primary symptoms of bipolar disorder are dramatic and unpredictable mood swings. Mania symptoms, which may include excessive happiness, excitement, irritability, restlessness, increased energy, less need for sleep, racing thoughts, and a tendency to make grand and unattainable plans. This can include high states of mania and low bouts, including irritability, paranoia, and many other symptoms that I think we definitely saw Jack display throughout some of the footage. I also want to point out that the drive from Newcastle City to Wilmington takes 12 minutes. When Jack leaves the pharmacy, he isn't spotted at the incorrect parking lot until 42 minutes later, which is quite a substantial gap, which leads me to possibly have the thought as to why has he only got one shoe and appears incredibly distressed in the footage. Is it possible that he had a manic episode and decided to jump or was thrown out of the car on the way to Wilmington, and that's why there's such a gap? Or was he assaulted on the street? All this is speculation. I don't have anything to back this up, but it's definitely something to bear in mind. Now, the dump truck drivers from the Cherry Island dumping ground and in general have said that in winter it's not uncommon for people to be sleeping in dumpsters as it's warm and all of these bins have a side access chute. In the documentary on Netflix, the driver himself that was driving the dump truck that Jack was later found in has said that several times before he's had people, homeless people, pop up and say, wait, I'm in here, to try and stop them from getting thrown in, because these dump trucks have a blade or ram in them that is used to compact garbage, which has been displayed. They can snap things like bowling balls, pieces of timber. They can crush up almost anything. Now, the official cause of death is homicide by blunt force trauma, and there are conflicting stories as to whether or not Jack had suffered a heart attack. Some people believe that in the autopsy report, blunt force trauma could mean that Jack's injuries were consistent with someone who was beaten to death, but I definitely think it's important to come back and think about the fact that if Jack had had a manic episode and had slept in the dumpster to keep warm, maybe he was then thrown into the back of the dump truck and the blunt force trauma was caused by the blade compacting the garbage. This then leads me to discuss several theories that were brought up in this case. One theory is that Jack was just unlucky and happened to be mugged. Now, if this was the case and somebody did mug Jack, why was he found with his Rolex watch, his military ring, and a heap of cash still on him? I don't really think the mugging thing holds up, because that's just pointless. What, are you just going to randomly shoot someone and shove them in a dumpster? When most murders that aren't premeditated, and especially muggings that go wrong, people leave the body where it's killed and move on. From there we have the theory of murder for hire. Obviously Jack was quite high up in the government and probably knew a lot of things that the average civilian didn't, especially when you want to look at the company Mitre Corp and the extensive career that Jack had had within the industry. Is it possible that somebody, or perhaps a corporation, thought Jack knew too much? Now, this is all pure speculation, but when you look at the footage, Jack looked as if someone was following him, or as if he was being hunted and he was trying to hide away from them, which may even run back to the theory of why was he inside of a dumpster. Maybe Jack had been killed, or it might lead on to the third theory that Jack was either trying to get away from somebody or had had a manic bipolar episode and for whatever reason had slept inside of the dumpster. Like we said, bipolar can cause a wide array of terrible symptoms, and having a bipolar meltdown or manic episode is definitely something else that could be seen, which is why Jack maybe thinks he was being followed and had then climbed inside of the dumpster himself to try and hide from someone, or just to stay warm because winter over in Newark at the time was fucking freezing. Alright guys, so I'm going to wrap this one up and give you guys my final thoughts on this. Now, we know that Jack's family and wife were documented in saying that he sometimes has memory issues and would often forget to bring or take his medication when he was travelling. I think it's possible that maybe he didn't bring his bipolar medication to New York and when he went there for his Christmas break, or forgot to take them when he moved on from there. I think this was the catalyst for a set of chain reactions where he basically managed to slip into mania from having bipolar, and therefore his decisions got worse and worse, as even if he had started taking these again, it can sometimes take weeks of steady use for them to stabilise a person again. As much as I'd like to buy into this theory that it was some big murder for hire plot through the government, I really don't think that's what happened here. I think that Jack just, unfortunately, his mental health and his situation degraded, and from here mania and panic set in, and it got worse. He may have been paranoid and thought that someone was following him, or just didn't realise where he was and slept in a dumpster that night. And yeah, basically the bin got picked up. The driver wasn't aware that he was in it, and from there he was crushed by the blade in the truck. This is a tragic and very sad ending to all of this theory, and I don't really have too much else to say on this at this point. It's good to see that the mystery has been reopened and people are definitely discussing this one a lot more online, and I'd like to see some people get some definite clarity out of this and some answers. This has been the Mindbend Podcast. I hope you have a good night.